You lack the figure for silk anyway. My aunt sent that to our family group chat 14 days before my wedding, right after secretly canceling my custom bridal order and buying the dress for her own daughter. I just stood there, watching 73 unread replies light up my screen with laughing emojis from the people who were supposed to be celebrating me. My name is Jenna. I'm 28 years old, and for my entire life, my aunt treated me like the family's ugly understudy. I kept telling myself that if I just stayed gracious and kept the peace, I would eventually belong. But the moment that finally broke the illusion came at my own reception. I stood at the head table in a cheap backup gown, surrounded by 150 guests. My aunt grinned over her champagne glass while her daughter twirled on the dance floor in my stolen dress. Next to me, my mother just stared at the hardwood floor, too intimidated to say a word. Always the punchline. Always pushed into the background. Always expected to swallow the insult and smile so they could shine. I thought I just had to take the hit. I was wrong. My aunt had no idea what file was queued up on my phone. She thought she had already won the night, but the single PDF I was about to forward to every guest in that room was going to expose her husband's secret overseas bank account, drop the hall into dead silence, and burn her flawless reputation to the ground. Before I go on, take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if this story speaks to you. Drop your location and local time in the comments. Now let me take you back. To understand why I was standing in a reception hall watching my cousin dance in my stolen wedding dress, you have to understand how my family actually works. We aren't a family, we're a court. And at the center of that court is my Aunt Margaret. Margaret has the kind of wealth that makes people go quiet when she enters a room. It isn't just the money, it's the way she uses it to keep everyone in a state of permanent apology. My father passed away when I was 21, and he didn't leave much behind besides some old tools and a mountain of debt. My mother, Diane, folded instantly. She didn't know how to be a person without a man to guide her or a sister to fund her. So she chose the sister. For 7 years, I've watched my mother audition for Margaret's approval every single day. She keeps a calendar of Margaret's good moods. She checks the weather in Margaret's head before she decides if she's allowed to have a headache. And because I'm the daughter of the failed branch of the family, I became the designated shock absorber. Last summer, during a Sunday brunch at Margaret's estate, I saw exactly where I stood. Margaret's daughter, Chloe, had decided she wanted to host a summer solstice garden party. The problem was, I had already sent out save the dates for our engagement party on that exact Saturday. I'd paid a $500 deposit for a small rooftop venue. "Jenna, honey," Margaret said, not looking up from her poached eggs. "Chloe's event is going to have the governor's press secretary in attendance. Your little rooftop thing, it's just not a priority for the family schedule. Move it." I looked at my mother, waiting for her to say something. But Jenna already paid. Instead, my mother reached across the table and squeezed my wrist so hard her nails left little red crescents. "She's right, Jenna," my mother whispered. "Don't be difficult, it's just $500. I'll ask Margaret if she can help me with my country club dues next month if you just play nice." That was the trade, my dignity for my mother's social standing. I moved the party. I lost the deposit. Nobody offered to pay me back. In fact, Margaret made a joke about it during the garden party, telling the guests that I was learning the value of a schedule. Everyone laughed. That's the sound of my family, 73 people laughing at a joke that isn't funny because the person who told it has the biggest checkbook. I tried to keep my head down. I focused on my fiancé, Mark. Mark is an accountant. He's the kind of man who looks at the world through spreadsheets and hard data. He doesn't understand family vibes or social debt. He only understands what adds up. A few months into the wedding planning, Mark was doing some routine checks on the vendors we were using. He happened to be looking through some public business filings related to the construction firm my Uncle Gerald, Margaret's husband, runs. He came into the kitchen with his laptop, looking confused. "Jenna, look at this," he said, pointing to a column of figures. "The public disclosures for Gerald's holding company don't match the local tax filings. There's a massive gap, like millions of dollars just floating. He's probably just moving money between accounts," I said, barely looking. "Margaret says he's a genius." "Geniuses usually remember to file their 10K forms correctly," Mark muttered. "This isn't a mistake, this is a hole." I didn't think much of it then. I was too busy trying to figure out how to keep my mother from crying because I hadn't invited Margaret's third cousin-in-law to the rehearsal dinner. I was still playing the game. I was still trying to earn a seat at a table that was designed to keep me on the floor. The symbolic weight of my place in the family was usually tied to the hand-me-down box. Every Christmas, Margaret would bring over a box of Chloe's old clothes for me, even after I turned 25 and had a career. She'd hold up a sweater with a snag in the sleeve and say, "This will look much better on you, Jenna. It'll hide those shoulders." And my mother would beam, clutching the cashmere like it was a holy relic, telling me how lucky I was to have such a generous aunt. I wasn't lucky. I was a landfill for the things they didn't want anymore. I remember one specific Tuesday evening. I was at my mother's house, helping her address envelopes for Margaret's charity gala, because Margaret doesn't hire assistants when she has family to do it for free. My mother was vibrating with anxiety. "Did you thank her for the shoes, Jenna?" She asked for the fourth time. "They're 2 sizes too small, Mom. My toes were curling." "Just say they fit. If she thinks you're ungrateful, she might not let me use the beach house in July. Do you want me to spend the summer in this heat? At my age?" My mother's comfort was a currency I was expected to mint with my own humiliation. I sat there, licking stamps, realizing that I wasn't a daughter to her. I was a bargaining chip. I was the good girl who didn't cause trouble, which meant I was the girl who didn't have a voice. I kept the peace because I thought there was an end date. I thought once I got married, once I had my own home and my own life with Mark, the understudy role would finally be retired. I thought my wedding dress would be the one thing they couldn't touch. It was the first thing I bought with my own savings, without asking for permission, and without checking Margaret's good mood calendar. It was white silk. It was custom. And for the first time in my life, when I looked in the mirror at the boutique, I didn't see the girl in the hand-me-down box. I saw a woman who was finally taking up her own space. I should have known that Margaret doesn't let anyone take up space she hasn't personally leased to them. The dress was more than a piece of clothing to me. It was a line in the sand. I had saved for 18 months. I took extra shifts at the library, I skipped vacations, and I ate more instant noodles than I care to admit. I wanted one thing in my life that didn't come from a clearance rack or a cardboard box labeled Chloe's old stuff. I found a small, high-end boutique downtown called L'Artiste Bridal. They specialized in heavy, architectural silk, the kind of fabric that holds its shape and makes you feel like you're standing on solid ground. When the dress finally arrived for the first fitting, I invited my mother and Aunt Margaret. It was a mistake. I knew it was a mistake the moment Margaret walked through the door. She didn't look at the gowns on the mannequins or the beautiful crown molding of the shop. She looked at the price tags. "Silk," Margaret said, her voice thin and sharp. She reached out and rubbed the fabric of my sleeve between her thumb and forefinger like she was checking for a counterfeit bill. "It's very ambitious, Jenna. Are you sure you have the posture for something this structured?" "I love it, Aunt Margaret," I said. I was standing on the pedestal, looking at myself in the three-way mirror. For the first time, I didn't feel like the ugly understudy. The silk was luminous. It hit my waist perfectly. Margaret didn't smile. She drifted toward the back of the boutique, her eyes scanning the room. My mother followed 2 steps behind her, clutching her knockoff handbag. "It's a bit much, don't you think, Diane?" Margaret asked my mother. "It's a very main character dress. I always thought Jenna would go for something more bohemian, something that hides the frame." My mother nodded instantly. "You're right, Margie, it is very loud. Jenna, maybe we should look at the tulle. Tulle is softer. It doesn't demand so much attention." I ignored them. I paid the final installment that afternoon. I saw the boutique owner, a woman named Alina, tuck my file into the completed paid drawer. I felt a surge of triumph. I had done it. I had bought my own dignity in cash. 4 days later, everything changed. I was at work when I got a notification from my bank. A massive credit had been issued to my account. It was the exact amount of the dress deposit and final payment. My heart dropped. I called the boutique immediately, thinking there had been a system error. "El Artiste Bridal, how can I help you?" Alina's voice sounded different, tight. "Alina, it's Jenna. I just saw a refund on my statement. What's going on?" "Is there a problem with the final pressing?" There was a long silence on the other end. I could hear a sewing machine whirring in the background. "Jenna," Alina said, her voice dropping, "I am so sorry. There was a conflict, a clerical error." "What kind of error? The dress is finished. I saw it." "The dress is no longer available," she said. "A VIP client with a standing account at this boutique." She saw the piece. She noted it was the last of that specific bolt of silk. She made an offer for the garment as is, plus a significant consultation fee to have it resized immediately for another event. "You sold my wedding dress," I was shouting now. People in the library were looking at me. "I paid for that, it's my property." "Legally, until it leaves the premises, we can cancel an order for any reason as long as a full refund is issued," Alina whispered. "She's a very powerful woman, Jenna. She told me if I didn't cooperate, she'd make sure my lease wasn't renewed. Her husband owns the building." I felt the blood drain out of my face. "My Uncle Gerald." "Who bought it, Alina?" "I can't say." "Who is she resizing it for?" "Her daughter," Alina said, and then she hung up. The damage wasn't just emotional. It was a total collapse of my timeline. My wedding was 2 weeks away. Every reputable tailor was booked months in advance. The custom silk I'd spent a year and a half dreaming about was gone, and in its place was a lump of cash in my bank account that felt like blood money. I drove straight to my mother's house. I expected her to be outraged. I expected her to call Margaret and scream. When I burst through the door, I found my mother sitting at the kitchen table. She was polishing a set of silver spoons that Margaret had lent her for the engagement party. "She took it, Mom," I said, my voice shaking. "Margaret bought my dress. She gave it to Chloe." My mother didn't look up from the spoons. She just kept rubbing the silver, her movements frantic and rhythmic. "She told me Chloe needed a gown for the debutante alumni gala," my mother said softly. "She said the silk looked better on a taller girl anyway. She said she was doing you a favor, Jenna, that the dress was wearing you and you'd be embarrassed in the photos. She stole from me. She used her husband's leverage to bully a shop owner." "She's family, Jenna." My mother finally looked up and her eyes were wet. "And she's the only reason I'm not in a studio apartment in the bad part of town. If you make a scene, she'll cut us both off." She told me. She said, "If Jenna makes this a problem, Diane, you can find someone else to pay your insurance." That was the first time I realized my mother wasn't just a victim. She was an accomplice. She was willing to let me walk down the aisle in rags if it meant she could keep her country club membership. The cost wasn't just the $5,000 for the dress. It was the realization that I had no mother. I had a dependent. I had a woman who viewed my humiliation as a necessary utility bill. That night, I sat in the dark in my apartment. I didn't cry. I felt a cold, hard clarity settling into my bones. Margaret hadn't just taken a dress. She had confirmed the law of the family. Her whims were more important than my milestones. Her daughter's gala was more important than my wedding. I looked at my phone. The family group chat was quiet for now, but I knew the storm was coming. Margaret never did anything in secret for long. She wanted the world to know she had the power to take whatever she wanted, even the clothes off my back. I called Mark. I told him what happened. I expected him to be angry, but he was strangely quiet. "She used Gerald's leverage on the lease," Mark asked. "That's what the owner said." "Okay," Mark said. "Jenna, I need you to do something for me. I need you to get me the names of every subsidiary company listed on Gerald's construction firm's letterhead. Can you do that? There should be some in your mom's files from when he helped her with the estate." "Why, Mark? The dress is gone." "The dress is a symptom," Mark said. "I'm looking at the disease. If they're using company leverage for personal bullying, they're doing it elsewhere. And people who bully like that usually have something they're trying to hide." I didn't understand yet. I just felt small. I felt like the girl in the hand-me-down box again, standing in the shadows while the real family members took the light. That was the night I stopped hoping for an apology. I realized that in this family, you don't get what you deserve. You only get what you can take back. The morning after I found out my dress was gone, I didn't go to the boutique. I didn't call a lawyer. I went to my mother's house to find the paperwork Mark had asked for. My mother was in the kitchen, humming a nervous, high-pitched tune while she packed a basket of expensive cheeses. "Margaret is hosting the garden club today," she said, her eyes flitting toward the door. "I told her I'd bring the Havarti. She says I have a special touch with the presentation." A special touch. My mother was 22 years older than me, and she was still chasing the high of a compliment from a woman who treated her like a seasonal domestic worker. "Where are Dad's old business files, Mom?" I asked. "The ones from the estate transition when Uncle Gerald helped you." "In the attic. But don't you go digging around and making a mess, Jenna. Gerald was so kind to handle all that legal jargon for me. We owe him for that." I didn't argue. I went to the attic. It took 2 hours in the stifling heat, moving boxes of old Christmas ornaments and moth-eaten coats, but I found the manila envelope. Inside were the settlement summaries Gerald had provided after my father died. I sat on a dusty trunk and read through them. Even with my limited knowledge, something looked wrong. There were management fees, huge, flat-sum subtractions from my father's life insurance payout, paid to a company called G&M Strategic Holdings. I took photos of every page and sent them to Mark. 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed. It was the family group chat. "Margaret, photo of Chloe in a blurred dressing room mirror. Margaret, doesn't she look divine? The silk finally found its soulmate. It was a shame to let such fabric go to waste on a simple ceremony. Chloe is wearing it to the alumni gala on Saturday, such a better use for it." The emojis started pouring in. Cousin Sarah, face with tears of joy, absolutely glowing. Cousin Leo, clapping hands, a masterpiece. My mother, "She looks like an angel, Margie. So glad the dress found its way to the right person." I stared at my mother's reply. I was standing in her attic, surrounded by my dead father's things, and she was downstairs texting her sister that it was right that my wedding dress had been stolen. I felt a physical pain in my chest, a sharp, cold realization. The harm wasn't just the dress. It was the fact that my entire extended family was watching a theft in real time and calling it justice. They were all on the payroll. Sarah's husband worked for Gerald. Leo's apartment was in a building Gerald owned. They weren't cheering for Chloe, they were paying their rent with their dignity. I walked downstairs. My mother was arranging grapes around the cheese. "Did you see the photo, Jenna?" she asked, her voice hopeful. "Chloe looks beautiful. Maybe you can see it as a blessing. Now you don't have to worry about being too much on your big day. We can go to the bridal outlet tomorrow. I saw a lovely polyester blend in the window." A polyester blend, I repeated. For my wedding. It's practical, and Margaret said if you don't make a fuss about the silk, she'll pay for the open bar at your reception. That's $5,000, Jenna. Think of the money you're saving. She isn't paying for the bar with her money, Mom, I said, my voice steady. She's paying for it with the money she stole from my dress fund. It's the same $5,000. She's just renaming it charity so you'll thank her. My mother dropped a grape. It rolled across the floor and under the fridge. You're being cynical. You always were a difficult child. Why can't you just let her be the big sister? It makes her happy. Because I'm the one paying for her happiness. I walked out. As I reached my car, Mark called me. His voice was different, lower, more focused. Jenna, I've been cross-referencing those subsidiary names you sent. G&M Strategic Holdings isn't a construction partner, it's a shell. And it's not just your dad's insurance money that went into it. What do you mean? I've been looking at the vendor list for your wedding, Mark said. I noticed a pattern. Every vendor Margaret recommended to you, the florist, the caterer, the boutique, they all have ties to Gerald's properties. But there's a second set of books for L'Artiste Bridal. I have a friend who works in commercial leasing. He sent me a redacted ledger. Mark, just tell me. Your uncle isn't just a landlord, Jenna. He's been moving money out of the primary construction accounts for 3 years. Millions of dollars. It looks like he's prepping for a total collapse. He's siphoning the family's wealth into offshore accounts. But here's the kicker. Margaret's name isn't on any of the new accounts. Only his and a beneficiary with a different last name. I gripped the steering wheel. Is he leaving her? He's draining her, Mark corrected. He's letting her spend like a queen while he empties the vault behind her back. She thinks she's the most powerful woman in the city, but she's actually standing on a trap door. And Gerald is the one with the lever. I thought about the 73 laughing emojis. I thought about the governor's press secretary. I thought about my mother, polishing spoons for a woman who was about to be penniless and didn't even know it. The threat was widening. This wasn't just a stolen dress anymore. This was a house of cards. If Gerald collapsed, he was taking my mother's security with him. He was taking the family's reputation. What do we do? I asked. We keep digging, Mark said. I need more than just suspicious gaps. I need the destination. I need to know where that money is landing. If I can find the account numbers, we don't just have a feeling. We have a kill switch. Get it, I said. Whatever it takes. Get it? I drove to the discount bridal store my mother had mentioned. I walked inside. The air smelled like dust and stale perfume. I looked at the polyester blends on the rack. They were scratchy. They were yellowed. They were exactly what my family thought I deserved. I bought one. A size too large with a drooping neckline and a zipper that stuck halfway up. I paid for it in silence. I sent a photo to the group chat. Jenna, found a dress. You were right, Mom. It's very practical. Margaret replied within seconds. Margaret, perfect. It won't distract from the floral arrangements. See you at the rehearsal, dear. She thought she had won. She thought she had successfully pushed me back into the shadows, making me the plain, grateful background character in her daughter's life. She had no idea that I was no longer playing her game. I was just waiting for the numbers to add up. The theft of my dress wasn't just a private family matter. It became the social event of the season for Margaret's circle. Within 48 hours, the story had been reshaped into a charming anecdote about family collaboration. At the Thursday night prep meeting for the reception, I watched my cousins trade jokes about how I was finally embracing a minimalist aesthetic, while Chloe was honoring the fabric. The spillover into the social arena was calculated. Margaret didn't just want the dress, she wanted the narrative. She started calling the wedding guests, my friends, my colleagues, Mark's family, to warn them that the wedding might be a bit understated due to my recent financial stresses. I tried to help her, of course. I overheard Margaret telling a group of women at the club while I was there picking up my mother. But Jenna is so headstrong. She insisted on that bargain bin find. I suppose some people just don't have the eye for quality. It's a shame, really, after I offered her such a beautiful alternative. The alternative had been a used bridesmaid dress from Chloe's closet, 3 years out of style and 2 sizes too small. By turning me into a charity case, Margaret was ensuring that if I showed any anger, I would look ungrateful. If I cried, I was unstable. If I stayed silent, I was submissive. I was being erased from my own wedding before it even started. The pressure moved into the RSVP list next. Margaret informed me that she had taken the liberty of inviting 12 of her business associates to my reception. These weren't people I knew. They were people Uncle Gerald needed to impress, contractors, city planners, and a developer he was trying to woo for a new waterfront project. "We need the optics, Jenna," Margaret said, leaning over a seating chart as if it were a battle map. "You have plenty of room. Just move your little work friends to the back tables near the kitchen. They won't mind. They're probably just happy for the free meal." "The guest count is already at the limit, Margaret," I said. "Mark's parents haven't even seen the final seating." "Mark's parents are lovely, I'm sure, but they aren't going to help your Uncle Gerald close a $10 million deal, are they?" She didn't wait for an answer. She just crossed out 3 of my college friends and wrote in the names of 4 board members. That was the moment the wedding stopped being a celebration and became a corporate mixer where I was the hired help. My mother sat in the corner of the room, nodding at everything Margaret said. Every time I looked at her for support, she'd look at her shoes. She was terrified that if I stood up for myself, the faucet of Margaret's generosity would turn off. "If you make a fuss about the seats, she'll pull the catering deposit," my mother whispered to me in the hallway. "Do you want to serve crackers at your wedding, Jenna? Just let her have the tables. It's only 4 hours of your life." It wasn't just 4 hours. It was the rest of my life. If I let her colonize this day, I was telling her she owned every day that followed. The social cost was mounting. Mark's parents were starting to feel the chill. They were quiet, hardworking people who had saved their whole lives to contribute to our future, and they were being treated like intruders by my noble relatives. I saw Mark's father standing by the bar at a pre-wedding cocktail hour, ignored by my uncles who were too busy laughing at Gerald's jokes to acknowledge a man who actually worked for a living. The family treated my stolen dress as a hilarious flex. At one point, Cousin Leo actually walked up to me with a glass of scotch and said, "Don't worry, Jen. Nobody's going to be looking at your dress anyway once Chloe hits the floor. It's for the best. You'd just be worried about spilling wine on it all night." He laughed, a loud, wet sound that made the people around him join in. I just stood there, holding my breath, feeling the weight of that cheap polyester bag in my car. They thought I was broken. They thought the ugly understudy had finally accepted her permanent role in the chorus. That night, I went home and found Mark in the guest room we used as an office. He had 3 monitors running, filled with spreadsheets, property maps, and wire transfer logs. The room felt cold. Mark hadn't shaved in 2 days. "It's bigger than we thought," he said, not looking away from the screen. "Gerald isn't just siphoning money. He's been using the construction company's pension fund as collateral for personal loans that are currently in default." "What does that mean for the family?" I asked. "It means that if those loans are called in, and they will be because the interest is compounding, the entire company goes under. The houses, the cars, the generous donations. It's all built on a debt that doesn't exist on the public books." Mark turned his chair around. His eyes were hard. "And Jenna, that offshore account, I found the beneficiary's name. It's not a business partner. It's a woman in the Cayman Islands. A woman who has been receiving consultancy fees that exactly match the mortgage payments on a villa in her name." The trap was fully set. Margaret was out there bragging about her wealth and stealing my silk dress to maintain an image of perfection, while her husband was literally buying a second life for himself with her future. "Can you prove it?" I asked. "I have the Swift codes, Jenna. I have the scanned signatures. It's all here." "I want it in a single file," I said. "A PDF, something anyone can open on a phone, no technical jargon, just the numbers, the names, and the photos of the signatures." "You're going to give it to her?" Mark asked. "No," I said, thinking of the laughing emojis and the way my mother looked at her shoes. "I'm going to give it to everyone." I felt a strange, quiet peace. For years, I had tried to be the bigger person. I had tried to be the one who stayed gracious while they kicked me. But grace doesn't work on people who mistake it for weakness. Margaret wanted a show. She wanted the optics of a powerful family. She wanted the spotlight on her daughter in my dress. I decided then that I would give her exactly what she wanted. I would give her a night the entire city would never forget. I would let her have the stage, right up until the moment I pulled the floor out from under her. I spent the rest of the night manually entering every email address and phone number from our guest list into a bulk send app. Friends, family, the governor's secretary, the developers, the board members. Everyone who had been invited to witness my understatement was about to get a front row seat to the truth. That was the end of the peacekeeping. Mark didn't sleep for the next 2 days. Our guest room, usually a quiet space with a floral rug and a soft armchair, had transformed into a command center. He had printed out bank statements, corporate flowcharts, and property records, taping them to the walls until the room looked like the inside of a mind trying to solve a puzzle. I brought him coffee at 3:00 a.m. on Monday. The wedding was 5 days away. "I have the trail," Mark said, his eyes bloodshot. He didn't look like an accountant anymore. He looked like a man who had seen the bottom of a very deep, very dark well. "Gerald isn't just hiding money. He's been using the family's various trusts, including the ones set up for your mother's retirement, as collateral for a series of high-risk development loans that failed 18 months ago." "So the money is gone?" I asked. "The money in the trusts is gone. The houses they live in are technically owned by a shell company that is currently in receivership, but the offshore account, that's where he's been putting the surplus. Every time he liquidated an asset under the guise of rebalancing the portfolio, he sent 40% to the Cayman account." I leaned against the doorframe. "Does Margaret know?" "No," Mark said. "She's still signing documents he puts in front of her. She thinks she's signing tax waivers. She's actually signing away her dower rights to the remaining properties." He handed me a folder. Inside was a series of wire transfers. The recipient wasn't just a number, it was a name, Alina Ross. "Who is Alina Ross?" "The consultant I mentioned," Mark said. "I did a social media deep dive. She's 32. She lives in Grand Cayman full-time, and she just posted a photo of a new yacht named the G-Man." I felt a cold shiver. Gerald's nickname in the family was G-Man. He was building a life raft for himself and another woman while my mother polished his silver and Margaret stole my dress to maintain the illusion of their superiority. For the first time in this entire process, I didn't feel like a victim. I felt like a witness. Mark sat me down and held my hands. "Jenna, we can go to the police. We can go to a lawyer now. We can stop the wedding." "No," I said. "If we stop the wedding, Margaret will find a way to spin it. She'll say Mark and I are having troubles. She'll make herself the victim. She'll say she's supporting me through a difficult time. The family will believe her because they want to keep their jobs and their invitations." "Then what?" "We wait for the reception," I said. "We wait until the governor's secretary is there, until the developers are there. Until every person Margaret has used to humiliate me is sitting in those chairs she stole from my friends." Mark looked at me for a long time. He saw the shift. He saw that the girl who was willing to wear a polyester dress to keep the peace was gone. "I'm with you," he said, "but you need to be ready. Once this goes out, there is no family anymore. It's not just Margaret and Gerald, your mother. She's going to lose everything." "She already lost me," I said. "She lost me when she told me my wedding dress looked better on someone else." That afternoon, I went to my final fitting for the cheap backup dress. My mother came with me, looking more frazzled than usual. She kept checking her phone, waiting for a text from Margaret about the floral centerpieces. "You look fine, Jenna," she said, her voice lacking any conviction as I stood in the baggy, scratchy gown. "We'll just pin the back. With the lighting in the hall, nobody will notice the fabric quality." "I notice it, Mom." "Well, don't be selfish. Margaret is under a lot of stress. Gerald has been very moody lately, and she's trying to keep things perfect for Chloe's gala. The least you can do is not add to her plate." I looked at her in the mirror. She looked so small. She was an expert at being small. She had spent 30 years shrinking so that Margaret could feel tall, and she expected me to do the same. She was a professional ghost, haunting her own life. "I'm not adding to her plate, Mom," I said. "I'm just clearing the table." "What is that supposed to mean?" "Nothing, I'm just ready for this to be over." I paid the tailor to do the bare minimum. I didn't want the dress to look good. I wanted it to look exactly like what it was, a consequence. I wanted the contrast between me and Chloe to be so sharp it cut the eyes of everyone in the room. When I got home, Mark had finished the PDF. It was 24 pages long. It had a cover sheet with a simple title, The State of the Union. It included scans of the siphon trust funds, the default notices on the family home, the photos of the yacht in the Caymans, the wire transfer logs to Alina Ross, the signatures Margaret had unknowingly provided to bankrupt herself. "I've set up the broadcast," Mark said. "One click, every guest, every business partner, every relative. It's a digital bomb." I felt a strange sense of duty. Not to my family, but to the truth. I had spent my life believing that my value was determined by their approval. I thought that if I was quiet enough and helpful enough, I would eventually be real to them. I was wrong. You are only real to people like Margaret if you can be used. And once you aren't useful, you're just a scratched label. I looked at the hand-me-down box sitting in the corner of my room, filled with the latest batch of Chloe's old sweaters that Margaret had dropped off. I picked it up and walked it to the dumpster behind my apartment. I didn't feel angry when I threw it in. I felt light. The clarity Mark gave me was the greatest wedding gift I could have asked for. He didn't just give me evidence, he gave me my spine back. He was the only person in my life who saw the injustice and didn't ask me to swallow it. "We're doing this," I said. "We're doing this," Mark repeated. I checked the guest list one last time. I added the boutique owner, Alina. She deserved to know why her landlord wasn't going to be a problem anymore. I added the local society reporter who Margaret had invited to cover the event. The leverage was ready. It wasn't a secret anymore, it was a weapon. And for the first time in 28 years, I was the one holding the handle. I went to bed that night and slept for 8 hours. No dreams, no anxiety. Just the quiet, steady rhythm of a clock ticking down to the moment the floor would vanish. The PDF was finished. Mark sat back in the swivel chair, his face illuminated by the cold blue light of the monitor. "It's 42 megabytes of absolute ruin," he said. I looked at the file icon on the desktop. It looked so small for something that contained the weight of 3 decades of lies. I thought about the first time I realized my family was different. I was 6 years old, and I had dropped a glass of juice on Margaret's white rug. My mother hadn't hugged me or told me it was okay. She had looked at Margaret with terror in her eyes and started scrubbing the floor with her own cardigan. That was the family law. Margaret's property was more important than our peace. Margaret's comfort was the sun we all revolved around. "Is the email list ready?" I asked. Mark nodded. "I've segmented it. Relatives, business partners, the press contacts Margaret bragged about, and every person on your final wedding guest list. One click and it hits 192 inboxes simultaneously. I've also set it to bypass spam filters by using a verified professional server. I felt a strange, quiet hum in my chest. For years, the only leverage I had was my silence. I stayed silent when they mocked my weight. I stayed silent when they moved my engagement party. I stayed silent when they stole my dress. I thought silence was a shield. I was wrong. Silence was just the permission they used to keep hitting me. I need to see it one more time, I said. Mark opened the document. We scrolled through the evidence. It wasn't just numbers anymore. It was a map of Gerald's escape plan. There were the photos of the yacht the G-Man docked in a private marina in Georgetown. There were the scanned copies of the siphoned trust funds, money that was supposed to be my father's legacy to my mother, gone in flat-sum management fees that Gerald had signed for himself. Then we got to the most damning part, the consultancy agreements between Gerald's firm and Alina Ross. They weren't for business advice. The invoices were for things like interior design consultation Cayman Villa and private transport logistics. He's been living two lives for 5 years, Mark said. While Margaret was busy making sure your wedding flowers matched her favorite shade of champagne, Gerald was literally buying a house for another woman with Margaret's retirement fund. I looked at a photo of a bank signature card. It was Margaret's handwriting, elegant, looping, and completely unaware. She had signed a document titled Asset Reallocation that effectively waived her right to any property held in Gerald's secondary holding companies. She had signed her own eviction notice while thinking she was signing a tax form. This was the leverage. It wasn't just a he said, she said family drama. It was forensic. It was undeniable. It changed everything about the upcoming wedding. I wasn't just a bride in a cheap dress anymore. I was the person holding the detonator to the entire family's social and financial existence. They think you're coming to that reception to be the punchline, Mark said, looking at me. They think they've won because they have the silk dress and the VIP table. Let them think it, I said. I want the room full. I want everyone watching when the truth hits. What about your mom, Jenna? She's going to be in the blast zone. I thought about my mother's face when she told me the stolen silk looked better on Chloe. I thought about the way she chose a country club membership over her daughter's dignity. My mother chose her side a long time ago, I said. She chose the woman who pays her dues. Now she has to live with the fact that the woman she chose is broke. I felt a sudden, sharp clarity. The leverage didn't just give me a way to fight back. It gave me a way to be free. I stayed silent. I was an accomplice to my own destruction. If I spoke, I was the architect of theirs. That evening, the family group chat pinged again. Margaret, photo of a 5-tier cake being delivered. Margaret, only the best for our guests. It's important to maintain a certain standard, even if the bride's choices have been a bit lackluster. Chloe, face with tears of joy, at least the cake has some structure. My mother, it's magnificent, Margie, a real showstopper. I didn't reply. I didn't send an emoji. I just looked at the PDF on my phone. The lackluster bride was about to give them a show they'd never forget. I went to the kitchen and made a sandwich. My hands weren't shaking. My heart wasn't racing. I felt like a person who had finally stepped out of a dark room and into the light. I wasn't the ugly understudy anymore. I was the lead in a play they hadn't even read yet. The wedding is in 48 hours, I said to Mark. Everything is cued, he replied. The moment you give me the signal at the reception, I hit send. No, I said. I'll do it. I want to be the one who clicks the button while I'm looking Margaret in the eye. I realized then that this wasn't about the dress anymore. It wasn't even about the money. It was about the moment when a person who has been told they are nothing finally shows everyone exactly who they are. I looked at the cheap polyester dress hanging on my closet door. It looked like a surrender. But inside the pocket of my bridal robe, my phone was a loaded weapon. I was ready. 48 hours before the wedding, the air in our apartment felt like the static before a lightning strike. Mark and I didn't talk much about the big day. We talked about the server. We talked about the data. We talked about the contingency plans if the Wi-Fi at the reception hall was throttled. "I've encrypted the PDF," Mark said, tapping his keyboard. "And I've scheduled the deployment. It's no longer a manual click. It's a countdown. Unless I enter a bypass code by 9:00 p.m. on Saturday, it goes out automatically to the entire list. It's safer this way. If they try to take our phones or kick us out early, the truth is already in flight." That was the logistical move. The dead man's switch for our dignity. The emotional move came on Friday evening during the rehearsal. We were at the venue, a sprawling, historic estate that Margaret had secured by donating a wing to the local preservation society. Everything was dripping in white orchids and gold leaf. Chloe was there, already practicing her walk. She was wearing a white sundress that cost more than my first car, but all I could see was the ghost of my silk gown. She looked at me and smirked, then leaned over to Margaret. "Does she really have to wear that thing?" Chloe whispered, loud enough for the acoustics of the empty hall to carry it. "It's going to look like a smudge in the background of my toast." Margaret patted her daughter's hand. "Don't worry, darling. The lighting will be very low during the speeches. We'll make sure the spotlight stays on the head table." I walked up to Margaret. I didn't flinch. I didn't look at my mother, who was busy arranging place cards for people she didn't even know. "Aunt Margaret," I said, my voice flat. "I just wanted to thank you for everything, for showing me exactly what matters to this family." Margaret looked at me, her eyes scanning my face for a sign of sarcasm. She found none. She only saw the mask of the ugly understudy she had spent years perfecting. "Well," she said, straightening her pearls, "it's about time you showed some gratitude, Jenna. It's a shame it took losing a dress to find your manners." "Oh, I've found a lot more than that," I said. That was the risk move. I was teasing the tiger. I wanted her to feel smug. I wanted her to feel so secure in her victory that she wouldn't see the blade until it was already through the door. My mother pulled me aside afterward. Her hands were shaking so hard she dropped her purse. "Jenna, please, just keep that tone out of your voice tomorrow. Margaret said if the night goes perfectly, she might talk to Gerald about getting you a position in the firm's marketing department. You could finally leave that library." "I like the library, Mom. It's quiet. People tell the truth in books." "Don't be a martyr. This is our chance to finally be part of the inner circle. Just one more day of being helpful." Helpful to my mother. Helpful meant being a footstool. I looked around the room. I saw the caterers setting up the bar Margaret was gifting me with my own stolen money. I saw the tech team testing the microphones. I saw my Uncle Gerald in the corner, looking at his watch, his face a mask of sweating anxiety. He looked like a man who was already halfway to the Cayman Islands. I realized then that everyone in this room was a ghost. Margaret was a ghost of wealth that no longer existed. Gerald was a ghost of a husband who had already left. My mother was a ghost of a parent who had never truly shown up. Only Mark and I were solid. On the morning of the wedding, I put on the cheap polyester dress. It felt like sandpaper against my skin. The zipper caught at the small of my back, leaving a gap that I had to close with a safety pin. The hem was uneven. The white was a sickly, bluish shade that made me look sallow. I looked at myself in the full-length mirror. I looked exactly like a person who had been defeated. "You look beautiful," Mark said, standing behind me in his suit. "I look like a joke, Mark. That's the point." "The joke is over in 5 hours," he said. He handed me my phone. The screen showed the timer. 04:52:11. The ceremony was a blur. I remember my mother crying, but they weren't tears of joy. They were tears of relief that she hadn't been embarrassed by me yet. I remember the priest saying words about union and loyalty, while Margaret sat in the front row, checking her reflection in a compact mirror. We moved to the reception. The 150 guests were a sea of expensive silk, sparkling jewelry, and forced smiles. The developers were huddled near the bar, talking shop. The governor's secretary was holding court near the orchids. And there was Chloe. She was wearing it, my dress. The heavy, architectural silk caught the light like a pearl. It fit her perfectly because it had been made for my body, and she had just enough of my DNA to fill the silhouette. She paraded through the room, telling everyone who asked that it was a vintage find her mother had scoured the European markets for. She was dancing in my dream. I sat at the head table next to Mark. I watched Margaret take the microphone. She stood under the crystal chandelier, the light hitting her like a halo. She looked around the room, savoring the silence as the guests turned their attention toward her. "Welcome, everyone," Margaret said, her voice honeyed and commanding. "Tonight is about family. It's about the traditions we uphold and the places we all fill." She looked directly at me. She smiled, that sharp, predatory smile that had kept me in the shadows for 28 years. "And tonight," she continued, "I want to talk about humility. I want to talk about how Jenna finally learned where she fits in this beautiful tapestry we've built." I felt Mark's hand go under the table. He pressed his thumb against my palm. 0002:15. The countdown was nearly at 0. The room was still. The waiters had stopped moving. My mother was beaming, her eyes fixed on her sister. Uncle Gerald was staring at the exit sign. I reached into the folds of my cheap, scratchy skirt and gripped my phone. "Go ahead, Margaret," I whispered to myself. "Tell them exactly who I am." The timer hit 1 minute. I felt the vibration of the first notification in my pocket. The threshold was here. Margaret was still speaking. She had the microphone held close to her lips, her eyes scanning the room like a general reviewing her troops. The crystal chandelier above her seemed to pulse with every self-congratulatory word. "We've always known that Jenna had a quiet spirit," Margaret said, her voice dropping into a tone of mock tenderness that made my skin crawl. "And while she might not always have the flair for the dramatic that some of us possess, she has finally learned the most important lesson of all. That being part of this family means knowing when to step back and let the true legacy shine." Beside me, Mark's hand was a warm, steady weight on my thigh. I looked down at my phone. The screen was dark, but I knew the timer had hit 0. I looked up. In the back of the room, the governor's press secretary pulled a phone from his tuxedo pocket. He frowned, his thumb scrolling quickly. 10 feet away, a board member from Gerald's firm did the same. Then another. And another. It was like a wave of silent lightning moving through the room. Margaret didn't notice yet. She was too busy looking at Chloe, who was preening in my silk dress, tilting her head to catch the light. "So, if you'll all raise your glasses to my niece," Margaret continued, "for finally accepting the gift of humility, chime, chime, chime." The sound of 100 synchronized notifications began to overlap. It started as a trickle and turned into a roar. People weren't looking at Margaret anymore. They were looking at their palms. I saw the boutique owner, Elena, standing by the service door. She looked at her phone, then looked at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and realization. She stepped back into the shadows. Margaret's smile faltered. She looked around the room, confused by the sudden lack of eye contact. "If you could all please," the toast. Nobody moved. The silence that followed wasn't the respectful kind. It was the sound of a vacuum. It was the sound of 150 people simultaneously realizing they were standing in a house that was already on fire. I stood up. The movement was slow, deliberate. My cheap, scratchy dress hissed against the tablecloth. I took the extra microphone from the stand in front of me and switched it on. The feedback squealed through the hall, a sharp, piercing note that finally forced Margaret to look at me. "Actually, Margaret," I said, my voice echoing off the high ceilings, "I think the legacy is having a bit of a technical glitch." "Jenna, sit down," my mother hissed from the next table. Her face was pale, her eyes darting toward Margaret. "You're ruining it. Sit down right now." "I'm not ruining anything, Mom. I'm just updating the guest list." Uncle Gerald was the first to break. He didn't look at the PDF. He didn't have to. He saw the look on the face of his lead developer, a man named Henderson, who was staring at page 14, the page with the wire transfers to Alina Ross. Gerald's face went from a flush of wine red to a sickly, grayish white. He stood up so fast his chair screeched against the hardwood. "Gerald." Margaret asked, her voice finally cracking. "Gerald, what is everyone looking at?" She reached for her own phone, which was sitting on the table next to her champagne. I watched her thumb shake as she swiped. I watched her eyes find the title, the State of the Union. I watched her scroll. Page 1, the siphon trusts. Page 4, the default notices on her own home. Page 9, the yacht. The microphone in Margaret's hand began to tremble. A low, distorted hum filled the speakers as the metal head tapped against her jewelry. "This is a lie," Margaret whispered, but the microphone carried it to every corner of the room. "This is. Jenna, what have you done? Gerald, tell them this is a fabrication." Gerald didn't say a word. He was looking at the exit, but the governor's secretary was standing in the way, his face a mask of professional disgust. There was nowhere for Gerald to go. The men he had spent the last hour trying to impress were now looking at him like he was a stray dog with rabies. I walked toward the center of the floor. I stood 5 feet away from my cousin Chloe. Close up, the silk of my dress was even more beautiful than I remembered. It was a masterpiece, and it was draped over a girl who was suddenly looking around the room like she was drowning. "Is it true, Dad?" Chloe asked, her voice small and high. "Is the money gone?" Gerald looked at his daughter, then at his wife, and then at the floor. He didn't answer. He didn't have an answer that didn't end in a jail cell. "It's all true, Chloe," I said. "Every cent, every transfer. The house you're living in belongs to a bank in Delaware now. The dress you're wearing, it's probably the only thing of value left in the family, and even that was stolen." Margaret let out a sound, a choked, ragged sob that broke the silence of the hall. She dropped the microphone. It hit the floor with a bone-jarring thump that made half the room flinch. She grabbed Gerald by the lapels of his tuxedo and began to shake him. "You gave it to her," she shrieked. "You gave our life to a girl in the Caymans, while I was saving this family, while I was maintaining our name." "You weren't maintaining a name, Margaret," I said, stepping closer. "You were maintaining a cage, and you used everyone in this room to keep the door locked. My father's money, my mother's dignity, my wedding." My mother stood up then. She walked toward the middle of the room, her hands hovering in the air like she didn't know who to touch. She looked at Margaret, sobbing and hysterical, and then she looked at me. "Jenna," my mother whispered, "what about my house? What about my insurance?" "You should have asked Gerald that years ago, Mom," I said, "instead of asking me to change my engagement party." The room erupted. It wasn't a roar, it was a swarm. The board members were surrounding Gerald, their voices low and sharp, demanding explanations for the management fees. The socialites were backing away from Margaret as if her bankruptcy were contagious. The society reporter was already on her phone, her thumb flying as she dictated the lead of a story that would be on the front page by morning. I saw the hand-me-down cousins, Sarah and Leo, staring at their phones in total shock. They realized in that moment that the payroll had dried up. The laughing emojis were gone. The court was dissolved. Margaret fell back into her chair. She looked small. For the first time in my life, she didn't look like a queen. She looked like an old woman who had spent 30 years building a monument to herself out of stolen bricks, only to have the ground turn to water. She looked at me, her mascara running in black streaks down her face. "You did this," she spat. "You ruined us at your own wedding. Who does that?" "A person who has nothing left to lose, Margaret," I said. "You took the dress, you took the seats, you took the money, you didn't leave me anything but the truth, so I used it." Mark walked over and stood beside me. He didn't say anything. He just put his arm around my waist, his solid presence a sharp contrast to the crumbling wreckage of the real family. "We're leaving," I said to the room. I looked at my mother one last time. She was sitting on the floor next to Margaret's chair, clutching her sister's hand, trying to comfort the woman who had just led her into poverty. She was still an accomplice. She was still choosing the ghost over the living. I turned my back on them. As we walked toward the doors, the sound of the room changed again. The screaming had started. Margaret was yelling at Gerald. Gerald was yelling at the board members, and Chloe was standing in the middle of the dance floor, crying into the silk sleeves of a dress that she would never be able to afford to dry clean. We stepped out into the night air. It was cool and clean. The valet brought our car around, a modest sedan that we actually owned. "You okay?" Mark asked as he opened the door for me. "I've never been better," I said. I looked down at the cheap polyester dress. It was wrinkled. It was ugly, it was a mess. But as we drove away from the lights of the estate, I felt like the most beautiful woman in the world. I wasn't the understudy anymore. The play was over, and for the first time in 28 years, the stage was empty. The fallout was swifter than I expected. By Monday morning, Gerald's firm had issued a statement about internal restructuring, which was corporate speak for a total collapse. By Friday, the news of the offshore accounts had hit the financial journals. The perfect family was the lead story in every local gossip column, but for the first time, I wasn't the punchline. I was the one who had walked away before the roof fell in. My mother called me 16 times that first week. I didn't answer. I knew what she wanted. She wanted me to fix it. She wanted me to use Mark's skills to find a way to save her club fees or her dignity. She wanted the good girl back, the one who would sacrifice her own peace to keep the matriarchy afloat. But that girl stayed behind in the reception hall, buried under a pile of white orchids and broken glass. I finally sent her a single text. "I'm done funding the delusion, Mom. You chose Margaret's shadow. I hope it keeps you warm." I haven't spoken to her since. 6 months later, Mark and I were sitting on the back porch of our new house, a small, sturdy place with a yard that needed work and a roof that didn't leak. It wasn't an estate. It didn't have a crystal chandelier. But every brick was paid for with honest work, and every person who walked through the door was someone who actually wanted to be there. I saw a photo of Chloe on social media recently. She was moving into a studio apartment, carrying a cardboard box. She wasn't wearing silk. She looked tired, plain, and remarkably like me. The understudy role had finally found a new owner. As for the dress, the cheap, polyester one, I didn't throw it away. It's tucked in the back of my closet. Every now and then, I see the hem of it when I'm reaching for my coat. It reminds me of the night I stopped asking for permission to exist. I think about that reception hall sometimes. I don't remember the screaming or the shame anymore. I just remember the feeling of hitting send. I remember the sound of 100 phones chiming at once, the sound of 150 lies dying in the dark. I'm 29 now, and for the first time, I have a figure that fits my life perfectly. It's been a long road from the hand-me-down box to here. But looking back, I realized that the most expensive thing I ever owned wasn't that silk dress. It was the courage to tell the truth when it cost me everything. It turns out, the truth is the only fabric that doesn't tear when the wind changes. I have a question for you. If you were standing at that table, holding the evidence that would destroy the people who hurt you, but also the only family you've ever known, would you hit send? Or would you keep the peace? Let me know in the comments. I read every single one. If this story spoke to you, check out my other video about the time my mother tried to cancel my wedding behind my back. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories about finding your voice in a world that wants you to stay silent.